there was the gathering bench, and corners was a judge parameters, centimeters, here.
Firstly, we believe that that artifacts are located in USA or in other European countries, it causes to more nationalistic ideas, because that people can manipulate that our artifacts had stolen, and that in not our museums, and manipulation in that case will be much more better, because they will show that they are extremely getting discriminating or other things. It's much more easier when you can show the problem and show that the European people are bad and set any stuff. Also, opening opposition says that there will be no discourse, but there would be no discourse because European white people will not be able to watch that artifacts, because they will be located in their other museums, in Africa for example. But I cannot agree by the reason he said himself, because he said that we already can read the history if we are in like developing countries. I mean, if we in his logic, if he can read history or to know that despite that that artifacts are not located in my country, but I can still read the history. So in that logic, white people also can read histories, read anything else. If he really wants to help to that people, I don't think that the artifacts is not a very influential in that case. Also, that people who wants to help, they're also already reading the historical context. They're people who knows that problems. They also debate, for example, with other people. So in that to prove that black people are discriminating. So in that case, we think that people are already interested in history. Moreover, when we will change the location of the museums and another, in that case, we also think that we will lead to discourse, because people will know that some artifacts are changing, and it will also be covered by media, because at least nowadays the media covers all very important things related to discrimination, related to colonization. So this is a very good way then to cover also that problems, because first it's already popular, and second it can refer to the colonization and other problematic things. Opening opposition do not think about our frame when we say that the 90% of the artifacts located in the basements, not in the additional place, because it's an additional practice in museums, because they have no at least place to locate the artifacts. So in that case, we think that this is extremely important to return the things. I do not think that I have to explain why they hold that artifacts in their basements, because it's additional practice that happens everywhere, and even if they have motivation, it doesn't matter. Matter is that that artifacts located in their basements, and nobody show that basements at all.
On that.
Okay.
Why do they not have incentives to move these artifacts to different museums, move them from Hoover to another place if there is not enough space? Give us logical reasons why it's true that 90% are in basements, and not a claim.
Okay, why it's very, I'm now answering why it's very important. For example, we want to explain that this is very important. For example, it can be important for people to explain for example, for children why it's very important, because nowadays when when in historical background is not enough to show that your history is like your identity is very because, for example, when you explain for the children that we had a great history, we had our heroes, our battles, etc., or our history, you have to show that artifacts in your country, because it's very important. Because, for example, the people will ask where is artifacts, and government will have to explain that the artifacts are not located in our country, that artifacts are not in our hands. So this shows the weaknesses of that country. This shows that it exaggerates in minds of people that that colonization will affect in further, that they can be independent in their minds, because they have no because the symbol of the having that artifacts is extremely important. Because it shows that you're able to hold your artifacts and able to show them. Okay, about 90% of artifacts. At least museums can say that we have 30,000 of artifacts, but show the 3,000 because it affects to their authority. People will come more, people will listen to more, and it makes them like authority for that museums and all. And also like it's important to cover more people, like saying that we have 30,000 artifacts, and this is a practice where museums can calculate or other things, so to make his historical background much more better, because museums context that is closely correlated with their background, and in that case we believe that it will work. Thank you for this.
Yeah, Josh. In my speech, I will talk about more than the opening argument about the national identity, how it will actually happen in this world, and then I will talk how this kind of symbolism of the European countries to give up their things will show to the people that they actually want to like help to them. They actually want to like to have this kind of cooperation with them and so on, and thus it will create kind of good things for them. And but before that, I want to mention some points from the opening opposition. What they talk about is they talk about that if we will talk about take away this kind of paintings, there will be a lot of national paintings. We don't understand this logic. Why it will happen? Because there is kind of a lot of modern artists, like they can paint this kind of struggle of the minorities, they can paint this kind of problems that can happen there, and therefore we don't understand this kind of logic that we hear about from the opening opposition. And also, even this kind of national things will happen. We don't understand why this kind of democratized, liberal viewed, the European countries will start to then to have kind of radical views towards them. This kind of a lot of gaps that should be filled up in the opening opposition. But and here, more than the nation about nationalism, we should understand that there are the difference between the object and the photo, the video or something. We now can, when we take this kind of object to ourselves, we feel that we are bearing, we are having this kind of feeling that it is all, it is like we handle it and so on. as I might say that people when are they thinking that this their own, they will be filled that they are like that they are filled with kind of retribution for them, as this is the logic of the point of how European countries will can help to them. Where when the people feel that the European countries, the colonized countries of their time, nowadays they're showing this kind of respect to them, showing to their this kind of the symbolic like kind of giving up the important kind of the stuff. The people like not the government may kind of cooperate with them, but exactly the nation, exactly the people nowadays are fearing them, are like having the anger towards them and so on. So therefore they are not nowadays can cooperate with doctors, cooperate with the teachers, because they fear them, like they think that the white people who before made this kind of struggle for us, who make a lot of kind of problems for all of us, and therefore this kind of people who want to teach a lot about kind of the women's rights, about the problems that mostly happen in the developing countries, mostly happen in these kind of places, and the people will not even listen to them. They will not even kind of hear to this kind of problems. Yeah, we understand that it is not kind of a huge thing that will democratize, will like liberalize, but however it is one of the steps how we can achieve this kind of problems, how we can make this kind of countries to believe in the kind of European kind of organizations as UN or as kind of UNESCO, as kind of like the organizations that can help to them, that are actually want to cooperate with them and so on. And even if it will be kind of their kind of national person that will cooperate with them, we shouldn't say that people will think that he is cooperating with the kind of white men and so on and so on. Yes.
So those people have been indoctrinated to believe that the authoritarian state is good for tens and tens of years. Why one-off given up of those artifacts will change that majorly? Even you yourself concede that it's unlikely to happen.
Well, I mean, not it will democratize. I mean, it will have kind of showing that. I'm not saying that it will kind of people will understand something. I mean that people will kind of have this kind of less barriers. Now, like for instance, if there will be kind of a barrier that I'm the religion and the kind of the before things that happen, now I will be less than to one thing, less than kind of having this kind of idea, and the people who may not have the religion, who are not maybe religious, the people who have this kind of nation like the things that hatred towards them, can nowadays have a more like kind of compassionate view towards them, can have this kind of views. And what most important, what I want to say, is the nationalism. How we can like unite these kind of groups. We know that from the past of the views that these kind of boundaries were divided by the kind of European countries that they wanted to have, like to give up these kind of lines that they even do not consider the ethnic groups that live from the other side and so on and so on. And therefore we should understand that this kind of in Africa, for instance, there are a lot of kind of problems. But the problem, the thing that we don't understand that we don't think that the rulers will not take this kind of the things that will predominantly dominate one of the nations. We think that it will take the root of all of the nations, like Kazakhs and Kyrgyz have this kind of Turkic lineages that have this kind of more united like heritages of their own, and therefore we believe that this kind of even this authoritarian person want to have this kind of more stable like country in itself, and therefore we don't believe that he will take this kind of chance. Yeah, we believe that it will kind of have more have more power to dictatorial regime, but we don't understand that in this case it will be better than this conflict that having this blood of like spilled out and so on and so on, and this will be more kind of peacefulness in this kind of regions. It will be more kind of the thing that can help to them. And in this kind of having this kind of national idea that we are united, that we are the one nation, or nation can help to them to more fight to more work for their countries, for their like for their understanding, and even if they know that this kind of they know this kind of the artifacts that they existed before. Nowadays, when they are burying them, then they were having them, they will understand that this is one thing that, and when the government will use this kind of artifact to show to the nations, will see that this will be a good thing for you, and so on and so on. And this kind of promotion of idea that they have the eldest lineages before will help to them to have this kind of unity among them. And we believe that this kind of paintings and so on will be safe, and we don't think that even if they will be heard from the from the opposition team, because people think that they are important and they will not be harmed at all, and therefore they will be at a good place, and therefore in comparison with the openings we should understand that we have more explain this kind of logic.
Thank you for your final speech. To continue the game on the opposition based on calling for the members of the opposition for 7 minutes. Here.
Okay, honorable speaker, in my speech I'm going to be mostly focusing on two things. First of all, I'm going to explain why exposure reduces racism internationally in more detail and a bit different ways than opening op does. Second of all, I'm going to explain why authorship issues are not a problem and why museums have a claim on those works on a principled level, and also why they can get more out of those works on a practical level. So those two things, most of refutation will be integrated in my case. But first of all, let us understand a little bit of framing. So I want to ask, when was the last time anyone in this room ever visited a museum? Most probably not often, right? Because usually in those colonized states, museums are in pretty dready situation, right? They're not properly maintained, they're not properly advertised. People even in local countries are not that interested. And all of those framings that the government side tries to push about the fact that we care so much about the head of Kinnessarek getting back to Kazakhstan and all of that, I don't think this is actually true for 99% of people. Most of the people, even if they do have some kind of a notion of the fact that some kind of artifact has been stolen, do not have this idea on the back of their head constantly. They may be reminded about this once a year, and even at that point they don't mind it as much. We don't believe that they actually suffer that much because of the fact that some artifacts are stolen. Most people maybe do not even necessarily believe that they are stolen, and this is necessarily some kind of practical issue. So on principle, they do not really touch on the fact why a nation has a claim on those things. That's important because, well, it's going to be integrated in arguments. So let's first then talk about the exposure, right? So more framing. We believe that the Louvre, like Rijksmuseum, Versailles, all of those museums are internationally renowned because of the fact that they have those big names, they have those amazing expositions that are by far more interesting than in museums in most states. Their galleries are visited by millions and millions of tourists each month, but also they have online expositions that get also hundreds of thousands of views each year. They have an incredible ability to expose any work of art to by far more people than any national museum, especially in those small states like Kazakhstan or Kenya or like any place else can do, right? We believe, second, why is that important? We believe that racism stems from false beliefs. Usually those false beliefs come in the case that, for example, you believe that those third world countries, African countries, Asian countries, etc., they do not have any culture. They're uncivilized brutes, right? And it is only right that we as white people, for example, should rule over them or should be considered superior towards them because we have all of those great pieces of art, pieces of science, pieces of whatever other artifacts that we have produced, right? And people do actually believe that oftentimes when such agenda is being pushed to them by white nationalists, by a lot of right-wing groups, by populists, and etc. What changes we believe in the world that we have? Well, what is happening in the world that we have? We believe that many people, when they go to those popular conventions, right, when they go to Louvre, etc., they see arts and crafts that are beautiful, that are intricate, that have philosophically deep meanings in their paintings, or maybe some kind of symbolism in the statues that they see, etc. They see that all of those states that are being pushed to them as backwards and unable to produce any kind of meaningful work, do actually have that work, and that work is truly something astonishing, right? Because usually those great museums do showcase great work, and they find great work because every nation pretty much have produced something great, right? Why is that important? It's because that exposure means that many people have their superiority beliefs challenged, right? And we believe that most museums not only have that, but also have this colonialism shaming expositions and notions inside of them. Because there is social opinion in those Western states usually that colonialism is bad and we should regret, but also because museums are tightly interconnected with academic world, and academic world on the whole mostly has this left kind of opinion, and therefore usually it pushes for those kind of things. So for example, they talk about the fact that this artifact is from India, it was shameful what we've done in India, look at the fact that how great of the artifacts they could have created, look at the fact that we have done wrong to them, right? It is very much important for those people. So what? Well, we believe that on the comparative, right? Extremely unlikely many people are going to visit those national museums in the states that the government side is talking about and going to be exposed to them from the tourist side, right? And even internally, like, people are unlikely to really see those artifacts and get all of those nationalism feelings that they're always railing up about, right? So it's a change. But the impact that we have on our side is the fact that we have by far less racism that can be sold to people, and therefore can be led to the fact that people have job discrimination, have discrimination in schools, on streets, and etc., all of those kind of things. Note please, most colonial states that hold artifacts of other nations usually have also a lot of people of minorities from that state because of the fact that they have this colonizer, you know, and colonized relationship with them. For example, there in Netherlands we have a lot of people from Suriname, in UK we have a lot of people from India, in France we have a lot of people from Algiers, right? There is a very major, you know, minorities in there, and they get discriminated, so the impacts are very big towards them, right? And compare that with opening up, so usually opening up either does not explain really what necessarily changes, other than the fact that, well, we showcase some kind of works of art that are showcase the colonialism, but usually those works of art are not about colonialism, they are about painting your old culture, etc., things like that. They are not necessarily of that agenda that all pushes. So then let us go to the second thing, to authorship issues. So really no table in this debate does actually explain why a nation has a claim on a work of art, right? They pose like that, sure, Kazakhs say we have a claim on Altyn Adam, or we have a claim on any other kind of work of art that we want, on some kind of painting, whatever, but really almost none of those paintings were created to be a part of national property, or even like expected to be some kind of a national property. Usually they are made for some kind of private reasons, were sold to someone for money and etc. They are made just because it was business for most of those people, right? And I believe that those museums actually have a proper principled claims on those paintings that nations might not necessarily possess. First of all, we believe that they directly participated in preservation of those works, right? It's very expensive to do that for old artifacts. You have to restore them, you have to pay for experts to do that, you have to hide them from Nazis when they invade your museum in 1945 and be scared for your life when you do that. Second of all, you have to understand that the museum's reasons for existing is about teaching, right? You cannot teach people unless you have ability to teach them by means of having artifacts from many different places. Let's apply rule utilitarian. Let's assume everyone will do what the government side is doing. So then we have only national museums that only expose you to national culture, which means that it directly reduces the utility of those museums' inability for them to teach the people about the fact how different cultures function, how they interact, and etc., which directly reduces their ability to do what they are meant to do, which is a world that is by far worse. Because of those reasons, we believe that it's very much unjustified for those museums to return those works, and we live in a better world where they do not do so, and therefore we're very proud of those.
In the modern world, right-wing parties thrive off the idea that countries other than the West are reduced and simplistic, that these countries have not contributed to world knowledge, that the Western countries are superior because of the ways in which how art and history and creativity and philosophy all came from them. These ideologies, these discourses justify like right-wing policies such as like discrimination against different migrants, closing off borders, and allowing things like hate speech and right-wing groups to rise. We on Closing Opposition are the only team in this debate to show why uniquely the idea of artifacts challenges these beliefs and challenges these discourses, to show that these people are actually have more complex cultures and that this is why we win this debate. 3 points in my speech. Firstly, I'll explain where, like, the clash where there is more exposure. Secondly, where there is more nationalism. And thirdly, about property rights. So first, some refutation to closing government. Two things that they say. Firstly, is that they talk about sense of belonging, that these cultures, that people want to feel as if they're part of something. First, they say that on the comparative, OO didn't make this comparative, but we say that on the comparative, even if you have more national identity, that's not necessarily something that is good. Closing government themselves say that these were arbitrary borders drawn on these countries, and these are likely to be multinational countries where people, only one specific culture will be taken. And we say that it will say that prehistory, 14th century, Kazakhs, nomads, whatever, will be the kinds of points and not the kinds of people who came in 20th century and will be excluded on the comparative far more. Secondly, even if that's not true, they don't explain why that is important. We don't, closing government does not provide explanation of why sense of belonging is actually that much important. Second thing that they say is that because you now feel that you're respected by developed countries, you're more likely to believe things like gender rights and things like that. We say that there are, on the comparative, that effect is extremely marginal. We say that there are multiple economic and political reasons why that is going to be likely to be true. Things like trade and things like political, agreements with these countries, that politicians have incentives to cooperate with these countries. We say that it's likely that these kinds of things will go. There are political reasons. Joining international organization justifies authoritarian rule. I'm more likely to believe my country if it's a part of UN and part of UNESCO and things like that. We say that that is not a big problem, that the effect is marginal. But even if it's not, we say that the argument is based on the fact that because you fear these people, you don't want to accept them. If we, on closing opposition, explain that there is more fear because of the rise of nationalism, we win in this clash and explain why that is likely to be true. So firstly, about exposure. Opening government says, these are going to be in basement. We think that opening opposition did enough of explanation, but there are also things like the fact that maintaining these pieces is expensive, they're more likely to be shown, and they're more likely to be rotated. Even if that's not true, Mukhtar explained why it is massively, it's going to be massively more popular because of the ways in which local museums are not true. Closing government says, well, there are a lot of people that are going to museums in the developing world. We think that on the comparative, you have 100,000 times more visitors to these museums because of how they are touristic places, because of safety in these places, because of how well they are maintained. We think that on the comparative, there's far more exposure on our side. What does that exposure lead to? Here, talk about nationalism. Opening opposition says there is more acceptance of minorities because of empathy towards these groups. Because you look at paintings that depict suffering of people, you have empathy, and you sponsor different groups. We think that explanation is fundamentally weaker than what we offer on closing opposition. Why? Because we think that closing government is fair in saying on both sides of the house there are going to be some kinds of paintings and some kinds of movies about this. So we think that it's fair to say that there are probably going to be a lot of British painters who painted Zulu suffering, and these things are still likely to be in those museums. We think that what is unique specifically about artifacts is not the fact that they portray empathy, it's because they are irrefutable evidence of the complexity of those cultures and that these cultures have history. It is not the fact that mostly they depict empathy, it is far more like empathy happens on both sides, but it is what is unique about them is how they contribute to history and how they are evidence of other people's culture. Why is that important? Mukhtar explains why nationalists rise because of how they reduce different cultures to overly simplistic things. What we change on our side of the house is that we portray them as complex, we portray them as people that have contributed to certain things, we portray Arabic script or Arabic numbers as something that is massively important to the world history. What does that mean? It means that at the point, we agree that you probably are not going to convince actual racists and actual right-wing nationalists. But the most people who will then hear from nationalists and from right-wing people that these people are scum, that these people are something that are useless, and we have to protect our Western civilization from them. Those things are not likely to be believed at the point in which people have exposure to this element. That is unique to artifacts because of the way, you would be forced to go to these museums, and that is something that you cannot unsee, and you probably and you are seeing that museum, and you're seeing, for example, 1,000-year-old Chinese Chinese script, and you probably will not longer believe that Chinese is a very simple culture. Closing.
if I'm the thief and I'm like stole someone's thing, and after the beating this kind of person, and then even if I will take care of this kind of this thing, I will not be not guilty of this kind of
Good.
crime.
So we explained in closing opposition why uniquely we prevent nationalism. That is the most important thing in this debate because of the way these minorities are treated in this country. So we think that hate speech and and things like that against them, they are more marginalized, they are most vulnerable in this debate. And even if like all the government's things are important, we say that they are likely to be less important than we're talking. Property rights, we think that what closing government says is, and opening government is that we have moral obligation to them. First, that assumes that the possession of these things is like national. We say that that is not true for many cases where it's probably property of a specific individual, a property of a specific tribe, and a property that came to the museums. It's not stolen from a nation, but probably stolen from an individual, and we say that there is no claim of nation to that. Secondly, even if it's not true, we say that there is no, even if it was stolen from a nation, both governments don't claim, don't explain why current people have a claim to that property. We say that yes, even if that's true, why do property rights move between different generations of the same people, that the states that have changed 100 times in the last 100 years, why do you have that claim? We say that alternative outside is the only one that explains why museums, because of how they contribute to this art, have that claim and that we win this debate.
Thank you for the presentation. To conclude, so please don't stay with